Welcome to the debate. Today we are taking on what you might call the final boss of philosophy. We are standing at the edge of the modern world looking back at the man who claimed, in a sense, to have finished the job of thinking. We are talking about Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
A man whose ambition was so terrifyingly vast that he didn't just want to understand the world. He wanted to, swallow it whole. Art, religion, science, history, politics. He wanted to grind it all down into one single unified logical system.
Grind it down is a violent way to put it. I would say he wanted to reveal the architecture of reality itself. I mean, Hegel, writing in the early 19th century, isn't just another philosopher in the canon. He is the pivot point. Before him, we have the scattered fragments of the Enlightenment. After him, we have, everything from Marxism to existentialism. My argument today is that Hegel offers us the only tool that can actually make sense of the chaos we live in. He shows us that history isn't just one damn thing after another, it's a rational progression toward freedom.
And that is exactly the problem for me. Because when you look at the slaughter bench of history, the wars, the plagues, the oppression, and you try to tell me it's all rational, you aren't just doing philosophy anymore. You're justifying suffering. My position is that Hegel's absolute idealism is a magnificent, crystalline cage. It's a totalizing system that suffocates the individual in favor of the whole.
I think you're judging the building before you've even walked through the door. Let's ground this. The year is 1806. Hegel is in Jena. He's finishing his first masterpiece, the Phenomenology of Spirit. Outside his window, the French army is dismantling the old Prussian order.
The Battle of Jena, right?
Exactly. And Hegel sees Napoleon riding through the city on reconnaissance. He writes this letter to his friend Nietmar, and he says he saw the world's soul on horseback.
Die Welt se la sufferte.
It's the perfect hook, you know? Hegel didn't see a tyrant or a celebrity. He saw an individual who, in that specific moment, embodied the driving force of history. He saw the universal concept of the age packed into a single human being. And this is the core of his thought. The true is the whole. You cannot understand the individual, Napoleon, you, me, without understanding the entire historical system that produced us.
But notice what happens in that story. Napoleon is the active agent, the world's soul. Hegel is just the guy watching from the window, writing a letter about it. And that brings me to my main critique. Hegel himself admitted that philosophy always comes too late. He used the metaphor of the owl of Minerva.
The bird of wisdom.
Yes, the bird that only takes flight at dusk. Hegel explicitly says, philosophy paints its gray in gray. It can only understand a shape of life when it has grown old and is ready to die. This implies that his system is fundamentally retrospective. It's an autopsy. It explains why the patient died, but it offers zero guidance on how the living should live. I mean, if he's right, we are just puppets of this world spirit, and philosophy is just a scorecard we read after the game is over.
That is a very cynical reading of a profound insight. Hegel isn't saying we're helpless. He's saying you cannot step outside of your own time. You can't play God. To understand your future, you must first understand the logic of your past. And this brings us to the engine of that logic. We have to talk about Geist.
The concept that scares everyone away.
Only because it's mistranslated. People hear spirit and they think of ghosts or some kind of mystical deity. But Geist implies mind, culture, spirit, and intellect all at once. It's the collective structure of human consciousness. It's the us that is bigger than any me. Hegel's revolutionary idea is that this mind isn't static. It learns. It develops through history.
And how does it learn? This is where we have to get into the weeds of the dialectic.
We do. And we need to perform an exorcism right now. If you took a Philosophy 101 class, you were probably taught that Hegel's method is thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
And you're going to tell me that's wrong?
It's not just wrong, it's a fabrication. Hegel almost never used those terms. That was a simplification by a critic named Chalibas. Hegel's actual movement is much more organic, and frankly, much more dangerous to your worldview. It centers on the German concept of Aufhebung.
Which is untranslatable, but give it a shot.
Aufhebung means three things simultaneously. To cancel, to preserve, and to lift up.
That sounds like a paradox.
It's how life works. Think about the process of learning a complex skill, like playing the piano. When you first start, you have to consciously think about where every finger goes. That's the first stage. As you get better, you cancel that awkward conscious effort. You don't think about your fingers anymore, but you preserve the skill. The technique is still there, embedded in your muscles. And you are lifted up to the level of making music, where you can express emotion. You couldn't get to the music without the drills, but the music supersedes the drills.
That's a lovely aesthetic metaphor, but Hegel applies this logic to history and to human suffering. He argues that truth emerges from error. He says in the Phenomenology that you can't learn to swim without getting in the water. You have to risk being wrong to find the truth.
Is that not the scientific method? We fail our way to success?
In science, yes. In history, failing means wars, genocides, and slavery. My issue with Aufhebung is that it functions like a philosophical magic trick. It allows Hegel to look at any atrocity and say, well, that was just a necessary contradiction that the spirit had to work through to get to the next level. It justifies the means by the ends. It treats individual human lives as fuel for the engine of history.
You're focusing on the cost, but you are ignoring the purchase. What is being bought with that struggle? Freedom. Hegel argues that without that friction, without that collision of opposing forces, we would be stagnant. We would be innocent, perhaps, but we would be unconscious. The true is the whole. You cannot separate the result from the process.
But the process he describes relies on a very grim view of human nature. I mean, we need to talk about his most famous example of this friction, the lord and bondsman.
Or master and servant, Herrschaft und Knechtschaft.
Right. This is chapter 4 of the Phenomenology. It's the section that set Marx and the existentialists on fire. Hegel is trying to explain how we become self-conscious. How do I know I am an I? And he doesn't say it happens by sitting in a chair and thinking, I think, therefore I am. He says it happens through a fight to the death.
It happens through the desire for recognition, Anerkennung.
But look at the scenario. Two consciousnesses meet in the wild. They don't wave, they don't trade. They immediately try to destroy one another. Why? To prove that they are free, to prove that they value their self more than their mere biological survival. It implies that the fundamental atom of society is violence.
No, it implies that the fundamental atom is social. That's the key. You're missing the twist. Yes, they fight. One gets scared of dying and submits. He becomes the bondsman. The winner becomes the lord. But Hegel shows us that the lord actually loses.
He wins the fight but loses the war.
Exactly. The lord wants recognition. He wants to be acknowledged as a superior being. But who acknowledges him? The slave, a person he doesn't respect, a person he treats as a thing. So his victory is hollow. He's looking in a mirror that is broken.
And the slave?
The slave is forced to work. He has to suppress his own desires and obey. But through that work, he transforms nature. He builds a house, he plants a field, he crafts an object. He looks at the world and sees the product of his own mind standing there. He realizes that he is the one with the power to shape reality. Hegel's arguing that the path to freedom goes through service and labor, not empty domination.
I agree that the psychological insight is brilliant. The idea that we need reciprocal recognition, that I can only be free if I acknowledge you are free, is the basis of all modern rights. But Hegel frames this as a historical necessity. He seems to say that slavery was a necessary phase we had to go through to learn this lesson.
He says it was a phase that happened and that we learned from it.
And that leads us directly to politics. Because Hegel didn't stop at two guys fighting in a field. He scaled this up to the state. And this is where he gets into, well, a lot of trouble.
The philosophy of right.
Yes. The book where he allegedly becomes the PR agent for the King of Prussia. He famously wrote, "What is rational is actual, and what is actual is rational."
One of the most maligned sentences in the history of ideas.
Is it? It sounds remarkably like a command to obey. If the state exists, it is actual. If it is actual, it is rational. Therefore, if you rebel against the state, you are rebelling against reason itself. It's the ultimate conservative silencer.
That is the interpretation of someone who hasn't read the rest of the book. You have to understand his terminology. For Hegel, there is a difference between existence, Existenz, and actuality, Wirklichkeit.
Split that hair for me.
A passing cloud exists, a typo in a book exists, but they aren't actual in Hegel's sense. Actuality is the synthesis of essence and existence. It is something that is fully at work staying itself, fulfilling its purpose. When Hegel says the state is rational, he isn't talking about the specific flawed government of 1820 Berlin. He is talking about the idea of the state, the institutions, laws, and norms that make freedom possible.
But he was writing checks that the Prussian reality couldn't cash. He claims the state is the actuality of the ethical idea. He distinguishes this from abstract right.
Yes, abstract right is just property and contract. It's libertarianism, stay off my lawn. Morality is subjective, I mean well. But ethical life, or Sittlichkeit, is the family, civil society, and the state. Hegel argues that you cannot be free alone. You can only be free inside a rational community that gives you laws to obey. Freedom isn't the absence of constraints, it is the presence of rational constraints that you self-legislate.
That is a very slippery slope. Freedom is the presence of constraints. That is the language of every authoritarian who ever lived. And let's look at who Hegel thought was capable of this rational freedom. We have to address the end of history problem.
It is a schematic view of progress, yes.
It's a schematic that creates a hierarchy of humanity. Hegel divides history into three big clunky epochs: the Oriental world, where only one is free, the despot; the Greco-Roman world, where some are free, the citizens but not the slaves; and the Germanic Christian world, where all are free.
And is that not the trajectory of history? The expansion of the circle of rights?
It's a trajectory that conveniently ends with him. It suggests that 19th century Europe was the pinnacle of human development. In his anthropology, he makes claims about climate determining potential. He dismisses entire continents. And regarding slavery, while you defend his endpoint, we have to acknowledge that he viewed ancient slavery as a transitional phase that was necessary to discipline the human spirit.
We have to be precise here. Hegel was writing at a time of limited anthropological knowledge, and I won't defend his prejudices. But on the philosophical point of slavery in the modern world, he was unequivocal. In the philosophy of right, he states that slavery is incompatible with the rational state. He didn't say it was good, he said it was a wrong. But, and this is the hard part, he viewed it as a wrong that history had to work through.
Work through? Again, that cold, mechanical language. My objection isn't that he was a man of his time. It's that his system provides a retroactive license for atrocity. It tells the victims of history, your suffering was just a stepping stone for our enlightenment. It is easy to say that when you're the professor in the lecture hall, not the person in the hull of the ship.
I feel the weight of that. But I ask you, what is the alternative? If we reject the idea that there is reason in history, what are we left with? A slaughter bench, a pile of meaningless tragedies. Hegel offers the difficult hope that humanity is actually going somewhere, that we are learning, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Or maybe it just bends toward power. And speaking of power, let's look at the ultimate power, God. Hegel claims to be a Lutheran. He talks about providence constantly, but I would argue his system dissolves religion entirely.
Dissolves it? He places it near the very top.
He places it below philosophy, and that is the kill shot. Hegel argues that absolute spirit has three modes: art, religion, and philosophy. They all look at the same truth. Art sees it in stone and paint. Religion sees it in representation, stories, images, metaphors. But philosophy sees it in the concept.
Pure thought.
Exactly. He argues that Christianity is the consummate religion because the Trinity maps onto a dialectic. God the Father is the universal, the Son is the particular, the Holy Spirit is the synthesis. He translates the mystery of faith into the logic of a syllogism.
He doesn't destroy the mystery, he penetrates it. Hegel saw that the modern world was becoming disenchanted.
We couldn't just believe because a priest told us to anymore. We needed to understand. He elevates religion by showing that its core dogmas are rational. The incarnation isn't just a magic trick, it's the profound truth that the infinite must become finite to know itself. God needs man just as much as man needs God.
But once you explain the concept of the joke, it isn't funny. And once you explain the concept of God, it isn't worship, it's a seminar. It becomes an intellectual exercise. He rejects the Lutheran sola scriptura, scripture alone, and replaces it with ratification by thought. The system becomes the new God.
I disagree. I think he saves faith for the modern intellectual. He allows you to be a believer without checking your brain at the door.
I think he turns the believer into a philosopher, which is a demotion. But this brings us back to the central tension of his legacy. You have this massive, totalizing system, and yet the moment he died, his followers split into two warring camps.
The right Hegelians and the left Hegelians. The right Hegelians looked at the system and said, the real is the rational, so let's support the Prussian state and the church. The left Hegelians, people like Feuerbach and Marx, looked at the dialectic and said, everything that exists is doomed to perish. The dialectic demands revolution.
Which proves my point. The fact that his system could spawn both conservatism and Marxism shows that it captured the total dynamic of reality. It didn't break, it evolved. The conflict between right and left is the history of the last 2 centuries. We are still living in the world Hegel described.
Or we are still trapped in the cage he built.
I don't see a cage. I see a ladder. Hegel teaches us that we are not isolated atoms. We are social, historical beings. We are shaped by institutions, and we shape them in return. Reason itself has a history. If we want to understand our freedom, we have to understand the whole process that got us here.
And I see a warning. I see a brilliant attempt to make sense of the world that ends up explaining away the individual. The owl of Minerva taking flight at dusk is a confession of impotence. It suggests we can only understand our cage, not break it. As Marx famously critiqued, the philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it.
But you cannot change what you do not understand. That is the final lesson. Action without comprehension is just blind chaos. Hegel asks us to open our eyes to the structure of reality before we try to smash it.
And he asks us to trust that the structure is benevolent. That is a leap of faith I am not willing to take.
Well, whether the owl has truly taken flight or if we're still stumbling in the dark is something our listeners will have to decide.
Indeed. And for those brave enough to try, the phenomenology is waiting. It's a path of despair, but it's a hell of a ride.
Thank you for listening to the debate.